Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, reading through Patriots History of the United States, beginning to end. We are now in lesson 187. Boy, if you've been with me through this whole time, well, congratulations to you. You deserve a medal. But we're not even quite halfway through. We're only on page 509 of the 15th anniversary edition. Now, several notes and updates. First of all, there is a new edition available right now. There's a new chapter available right now. I'll send it to you free. It's in PDF form. It's not hardcover. Will never be hardcover or paperback. Publisher doesn't want to do another one. And it covers the years 2018 to 2023. However, I have updated the update, and I now have broken that into two chapters. They're both long. You know, Mike Allen mentioned to me that our first chapter is something like, I don't know, 30 or 40 pages typewritten and printed, published, which is a lot different. And that covered something like 200 years. And now we're looking at covering 5 years, and it's taking, I don't know, my printed version is about 150 pages. However, don't freak out. However, I write for my eyes these days in 16-point font. Normally you write 12-point font. So right there, you're going to cut it down by 10%. Then when you shrink to publish in a printed page like the book, it's usually saves another 25 to 30%. So this is still going to be long. I mean, by any standards, it would be normally in a chapter like this, maybe 80 or 90 pages, including notes. It's worth it. I mean, any of you who've lived through this, and you all have lived through this, the last few years, it's, Lenin, I hate the guy, disgusting creature, but he had some interesting observations. And he had one saying that said there are decades in which nothing happens, and there are weeks in which decades happen. And we are in a period of a decade going from 2015 to now, really 10 years, in which centuries have happened. We've introduced AI. Computers have just gone crazy in operation all over the world. We've seen the real birth of social media. We've seen President Trump get elected once against all odds, fight for his survival, lose a questionable election, had the government come after all kinds of conservatives, Catholics, white nationalists, all sorts of people, seen Trump nearly get assassinated and come back to win again. And now he is on a tear. He is going after illegals. He is going after tariff money, bringing money into the United States like never before. Anyway, we'll get to all that. My point is, if you get the new material, it's going to be a lot of material. We cover COVID, right? And there's just a lot that seems to have happened here in the last few years compared to other times in American history, say the 50s, when things were a little bit slower. So don't freak out. So bottom line, write me at larry@wildworldhistory.com if you want the right now chapter 23, which goes from 2018 to 2023. However, I have now added more and have broken these up into two chapters, 23 and 24. They're both kind of long, but it goes up to 2025 now. Really, I'll probably finish this. Well, it'll go through pretty much the end of 2025. So if you want that, I have it out for proofreading with Mike Allen and one other person, my business manager, Kathy Heasley, who's made comments. I'm incorporating those comments. I'm trying to shorten wherever I can. I haven't had much success. And that new 2-chapter update will be available by November. So what I suggest is if you want the update, get it now, email me. I'll send you the update that I have right now. But watch your Wild World of History email. which you're going to get at least once a month, maybe twice a month if you're on the list. And believe me, if you've written me or you bought a product or you subscribe to my Substack, or you're on the list. So just keep watching the list for when we have the 2-chapter update available. Okay, that said, keep in mind all of the readings go from the 15th anniversary edition. If you have an earlier edition, the headers will work, the chapters will work, but the page numbers are not going to be the same. So just keep that in mind. Really, and I'm not doing this to sell books, but really you need to get the 15th anniversary edition. Here's another reason why. One of the things included in that new chapter, whether it's the single chapter or later the double chapter, I have about 20 pages of insertions, new material, new research, observations, just stuff that I thought, really people want to hear about this. They should know about this. But we didn't have room. So you're free to insert these as you go through. If we get far enough today, I'm not sure we will, but I'm coming up on another insertion to be made on page 512. So we'll see. Okay. So I think that's everything. Make sure you subscribe to the VIP. The VIP gives you now about 60 or 70 hours of video, me doing different lessons on everything from the Crusades to Prohibition to the income tax to important people like Napoleon or Hitler, plus ongoing longer lesson series such as Integrity. The newest series is called Integrity. So far, I've done 21 lessons on Winston Churchill's life, and the most current Integrity series is Billy Graham, and I think we have now 12 episodes. I'm not sure those have been posted yet, but they will be. You've also got the 1620 default, why the 1619 project is wrong, many other things like that. It's well worth the $70 a year, believe me. So that's the VIP. Or if you want my political commentary, go over to the Wild World of Politics, sign up for the Insider, and there you're going to get my paid Substack 3 days a week. I do a lot of analysis on politics, voter registration, stuff like that. Plus, every once in a while, kind of a fun one like top 10 books you should read, top 10 rock songs, best guitar solos in rock history, things like that. So check that out. That's Wild World of Politics Insider. And you'll also get a whole slew of videos, including some you won't get in VIP. This is kind of like the Disney World thing, right? We have some attractions at this park and some attractions at that park. And we want you to get the park hopper pass, more or less. But anyway, okay. Got all that? Any questions at all, you email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com. So we are getting really now into what you would call the modern age. Chapter 14, War, Wilson, and Internationalism, again from the 15th anniversary edition. The Dawn of Dreams. At the turn of the century, the United States had joined much of the industrialized world in expecting that the fantastic progress and wondrous advances in science and technology would produce not only more affluence, but peace and brotherhood. That, after all, had been the dream of the progressive movement and its myriad reforms under Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. Unions continued to press for government support against businesses. Women maintained pressure for the franchise, the right to vote, and blacks examined ways to reclaim the rights guaranteed by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that had been suppressed, I would add, by the Democrat Party mostly, since 1877. The slow realization of some of these dreams offered a strong lesson to those willing to learn. Human nature changes slowly, if at all. And of course, if you're a Christian, you're a believer, most of us believe that human nature changes not at all, that man has a sin nature that must be addressed, and it can only be addressed one way. Such was the case in Europe. The euphoria of goodwill brought about by the international scientific exchanges of the 1890s, combined with the absence of European land war involving the major powers since 1871, that would be the Franco-Prussian War, which the Germans won, which left a bad scar on the French. This is not in the book, but when the Germans won that war, the French took all the wrong lessons from it. And they decided that what was lacking is going to have an impact on what we talk about here with World War I and the French in the war. That after the Franco-Prussian War, the French concluded that what was lacking, the reason they lost, was élan, spirit, fighting spirit, guts, courage, cojones. They didn't have enough of that. And so their revised doctrine. Now, folks, get this. What did we introduce in the American Civil War? Long-range artillery, heavy long-range artillery like Parrott and Dahlgren guns, machine guns in the form of the Gatling gun that since then the British took an American design by Lewis Browning and created something called the Maxim gun, which is kind of their standard machine gun all the way up to really World War II in one way or another. Landmines, new communications, transport by train, communications by telegraph, of course, obviously now by telephone. So the French took the message from the Franco-Prussian War that the reason they lost was they didn't have enough fighting spirit. And the way to reclaim that was with the bayonet charge and wearing these outrageous uniforms that had red pants on them rather than, doppel gray and camouflage and helmets. Oh no. They were going to stand out on the battlefield. So the loss in the Franco-Prussian War caused massive casualties in World War I for the French, who took all the wrong lessons from it. All right. So the euphoria of goodwill brought about by international scientific exchanges in the 1890s, combined with the absence of European land war involving the major powers since 1871, provided the illusion that conflict had somehow disappeared once and for all. Was peace at hand? Many Europeans thought so, and the ever-optimistic Americans wanted to accept the judgment of their continental friends in this matter. Until very recently, folks, we have, especially our elites, our really lame-brained elites, have always wanted to do what the Europeans did. Oh, the Europeans do this, Europeans do that, except when it comes to having single-day elections with paper ballots. They don't want to follow the Europeans there. But they're always looking, oh, what are the Europeans going to do? Oh, we need to follow the Europeans. And folks, I'm just going to tell you, since 1900, the Europeans have been behind us in almost everything. In weaponry, they were temporarily ahead. The Germans were, especially, and we caught up just like that and then vastly surpassed them. But you got to understand that American intellectuals and elites are always looking at what the Europeans want to do. British writer Norman Angell, in his 1909 book, Europe's Optical Illusion, better known by its 1910 re-release title, The Great Illusion, continued that the industrialized nations were losing, quote, the psychological impulse to war. They just didn't have it in them to fight a war again. One diplomat involved in a commission settling a conflict in the Balkans thought the resulting 1913 peace treaty there represented the end of warfare. Increased communications, fear of socialist revolutions, resistance of taxpayers, and international market competition all forced the great powers to the point where they were manifestly unwilling to make war according to this view. I'm not saying that was the truth. I'm saying that's what they thought. A young Winston Churchill, then a member of Parliament, rose for his first speech. Now, Winston Churchill had seen war, as you'll see in my series, Integrity. By this time, Winston Churchill had already fought in the Boer War. He'd already been a prisoner of war and escaped. He was at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, where his cavalry unit, 21st Lancers, was almost cut off in an ambush by the dervishes. And it was the only place in the entire battle where the Europeans, the British, lost any soldiers at all. The rest of it was just a killing ground as the dervishes attacked massed, what I just talked about, massed machine guns, massed cannons, and volley fire by 2 or 3 ranks of men at 300 and 400 or 500 yards. So a young Winston Churchill, then a member of Parliament, rose for his first speech and agreed with this assessment. Quote, in former days, he intoned, when wars arose from individual causes, from the policy of a minister or the passion of a king, when they were fought by small regular armies, it was possible to limit the liabilities of the combatants. But now, when mighty populations are impelled on each other, when the resource of science and civilization sweep away everything that might mitigate their fury, a European war can only end in the ruin of the vanquished and the commercial dislocation and exhaustion of the conquerors. Well, that's really what happened to England. Exactly what he said here was that they won, but they were commercially dislocated and exhausted and didn't want to fight another war, and it really hurt them in World War II. Churchill, who'd seen combat at Omdurman as a lieutenant in the 24th Lancers, I say 21st Lancers, 24th Lancers, witnessed firsthand the lethality of modern rapid-fire rifles, Maxim machine guns, and long-range artillery. So he knew what war could do. Other military experts chimed in, including Ivan S. Bloch, B-L-O-C-H, who, even before the Boer War had concluded, predicted that the combination of automatic weapons and trenches would give a decided edge to the defense so as to increase the bloodshed in a subsequent war to unfathomable levels. It's just going to cost too much. Nobody will fight. Is war impossible? Asked the subtitle of Bloch's book. Many thought so. Americans knew from the losses in the Spanish-American War that the slightest technological advantage, such as smokeless powder, which the Spanish had and we did not, could translate into massive combat losses. Two factors obscured the horrendous reality of conflicts. First, although combat that pitted one European power against another or Americans against each other resulted in massive bloodletting, more Americans were killed on the third day of Gettysburg than in all the frontier wars put together. All too often, American and European papers carried lopsided news of the carnage in the colonies when Western forces crushed native armies. Britain, ignoring severe losses in the Boer War, instead pointed to the overwhelming victories at Ulundi in 1879 or Omdurman 1898. Americans discounted the losses to the Spanish bullets and overemphasized their success at smashing the Apache, Nez Perce, and the Sioux. The idealistic notion that war itself had been banished from human society was even dangerous. Again, it's not comparable or doesn't fit with the Bible, not consistent with the Bible. Teddy Roosevelt's success at bringing the Russians and the Japanese together with the Portsmouth Treaty, combined with the unprecedented affluence of the United States, fooled many into thinking that a new age had indeed dawned. A certain faith in technology and affluence buttressed these notions. Americans certainly should have realized and rejected this pattern. The very principles that if only there was enough wealth spread around, people will refuse to fight over ideological or cultural differences, had failed to prevent the Civil War. Remember going back that Henry Clay and the Whig Party had this American system, and the American system was designed to knit all of the states together, regardless of whether or not they had slaves, because in the American system, they were all going to benefit from some aspect of the American system, whether it was a national bank, whether it was tariffs that redistributed some of the wealth, whether it was internal improvements like bigger ports for southern states or railroads or harbors or whatever it was. And of course, that stuff didn't mean anything when it came to the central issue of slavery. And so the idea that you can essentially bribe people into forgetting what they really believe in, that'll take you a little ways, but it won't take you very far. Or put in crass terms of Jacksonianism, as long as wallets are fat and bellies are full, ideas do not matter. At almost the same moment that Europe's optical illusion reached publishers, a former German chief of staff, Count Alfred von Schlieffen, wrote an article with a vastly different conclusion, suggesting that in the near future, four powers, France, Russia, Italy, and Britain, would combine for a concentrated attack on Germany. This is a German saying this. Guys, we're going to be attacked. Schlieffen had already prepared a detailed battle plan for such an eventuality, calling for a rapid swing of German troops through neutral Belgium to defeat the alliance before it could coordinate against the Empire of Germany. Thus, whereas some in England and America prophesied peace, others were already sharpening their swords for war. Now, here comes the timeline. As always, I do not read the timelines. You can do that. Next header after the timeline. Marvels of the earth and skies. The technology that made killing so easy from 1914 to 1918 had offered only hope and promise a few years earlier. Many of the new gizmos and gadgets had come from American inventors. The United States blew past the established European industrial giants largely because of the openness of the system and the innovation that had come from generations of farmers and mechanics who translated their constant tinkering into immense technological breakthroughs. Auto wizard Henry Ford was such a man. Now, understand, most historians of economic growth, most scholars of science, technology, will tell you it's not the big breakthrough that advances society the way it is the myriad of little constant improvements in existing stuff that give it a whole new look. And that's why, for example, China had gunpowder first, but it didn't do them a whole lot of good. It did them a little good, but not too much. And when Europeans showed up, Europeans smashed them. Why? Because gunpowder is only one element of what makes a firearm work. By the 1600s, even early 1500s, you had fairly effective versions of muskets, and these muskets used clock, gear, and tooth technology to pull the hammer back and to release, to strike the matchlock or the flintlock that would send the bullet out. But with cannons, for example, you needed bronze casting in order to make them so they didn't blow up in your face. And where did that bronze casting come from? Well, it came from church bells in Europe. So it's a piling on of a whole bunch of technologies that make one technology begin to stand out. For example, there were arguments in the 1500s, early 1600s, that England ought to ignore firearms and continue to train with bows and arrows, that bows and arrows could penetrate knight armor, that you could fire 4 or 5 arrows in the time it took you to reload and fire a musket one time. But why were firearms adopted? And the answer is firearms were adopted because it was fairly easy to take a farmer or a peasant and teach them through drill the 15 steps it took to load and fire a musket And then if you wanted to get a little bit fancier, to take a step back and the next row steps between you and fires their muskets, than it is to spend a lifetime learning to be a great archer, which is really what you needed. And so it just became more convenient to say, here's your musket, your musket, your musket. Let's go practice for 2 weeks. You'll be decent shots. Not great shots, but decent shots. So an electrical mechanic with Edison Electric in Michigan in the 1890s, Henry Ford spent his nights reading manuals about a new internal combustion engine. By 1896, he imagined ways to mate it to a horse carriage. In fact, many others had already done so. At the Chicago Exposition of 1893, no fewer than half a dozen horseless carriages were on display. And 4 years later, Charles Duryea demonstrated the feasibility of cross-country travel when he drove a car from Cleveland to New York. Now, Ford welded a larger four-cycle engine to a carriage frame and called it a quadricycle. It was scarcely bigger than a child's red wagon with a single seat and barely enough room for two adults. Even at that, it was too large to get through the door in the shed where Ford built it, and he had to take an axe to the walls to free his new creation. Henry Ford lacked any formal education. He adapted his ideas through trial and error and recruited the best help, combining ideas with developing his own engine and wheels. His closest associates always noted that Ford seemed to have an idea when the experts did not. After testing the car for 3 years, Ford finally decided he was ready to mass produce automobiles. Like other visionaries, Ford looked well beyond the horseless carriage to a mobile society with millions of people using automobiles. By the way, you want a good source on this. See my friend and former colleague at the University of Dayton, John Heitman, Heitmann, who has a great book called The Automobile in American Life. And there's also a very good book just out recently, well, last 10 years, by Matthew Crawford, that's not in the end notes because it just came out, called Why We Drive. And both Heitman and Crawford like cars. And John Heitman, in fact, hung out with Jay Leno and Cy's personal collection, hung out with Eric Clapton, who is a car enthusiast. So anyway, check out their books on and what they have to say about Ford. Scoffers had their own opinions. Woodrow Wilson called the car, quote, the new symbol of wealth arrogance, unquote. And when Ford asked for a loan in 1903 to build his contraption, the president of the Michigan Savings Bank told Ford's lawyer that, quote, the horse is here to stay, but the automobile is only a novelty, a fad, unquote. Like countless other successful entrepreneurs, Ford opened his first car company only to have it fail in 1900. Then he opened another, and it too collapsed. On a third try in 1903, the Ford Motor Company finally opened for good. This is another trait, by the way, with all entrepreneurs. Almost everyone has failed. You know the story of Edison failing about 1,000 times to get a light bulb until he finally, got the right one. This happens all the time. You're constantly fidgeting and fiddling. Great scene comes to mind. I love the Avengers movies. I just love them. And in Endgame, you'll recall that Tony Stark is sitting there pondering a time machine. He really doesn't think it can be done. And he has this massive computer set up just conveniently at his house, just manages to set up this world-class stuff in his house. And he's just over there doing dishes or something. And all of a sudden the computer goes, model complete, successful. And so now he's got time travel, right? But the idea is that entrepreneurs fail all the time. This is how you learn. This is why communism doesn't work, folks. Communism doesn't work because it tries to prevent failure. If you prevent failure, you will never get innovation that comes from failure. You will never get the next thing. You might get a watered down bad version of your first attempt, but never the best thing. Unable to read blueprints for himself. How about that? Ford couldn't read blueprints. Yanni, the great musician, who's played worldwide, kind of has elevator music, but he's really good. He doesn't read music. He writes hieroglyphics, and a friend of his translates for all the musicians. Unable to read blueprints himself, Ford nevertheless contributed all the major ideas to the automobile, including the use of vanadium steel, the design of transmissions, planetary gears, and the decision to use a detachable head for the block, even though no one knew how to build a head gasket strong enough to withstand the pressure. His plans mass-produced 8 different models of cars, but lost money on several, leading Ford to conclude that he should focus on a single variant, the Model T. You've heard that phrase, don't put all your eggs in one basket. A somewhat different phrase used by most successful entrepreneurs is put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket. That's what Carnegie said when he developed his steel company. So Ford puts it all in the Model T. All other models were eliminated from the Ford production lines. This allowed Ford to emphasize lower cost over speed, which was not needed anyway. Who needed a fast car back then? Detroit had a speed limit of 8 miles an hour and fines of $100, 2 months' wages for a single violation. I will confess in my youth to having piloted my Chevelle 454 450 horsepower monster to over 112 miles an hour before I shut it down. So I've gone fairly fast. Quote, I will build motor car for the great multitude, he announced. It will be so low in price that no man making good salary will be unable to own one. As the price fell to $850, Ford sold 12,000 Model Ts in 12 months, continually pressing the prices downward. This is what Rockefeller did too, remember? By the 1920s, Ford estimated for every dollar he chopped off the price, he sold another 1,000 cars. Ford's great twist to Eli Whitney's mass production techniques came when he applied electric power to the Highland Park facility to move the car from one station to another, reducing work time and wasted effort. In other words, the car comes to the employee, not the employee running around to the car. Ford also understood that economy was obtained through simplicity, another of Whitney's lessons. He therefore concentrated entirely on the T, or the Tin Lizzie as some called it, and made it as simple as possible. It had no starter, no heater, no side windows, was available only in black. He used to joke you could have it in any color you wanted as long as it was black, but it was cheap. Ford's own line workers could purchase one with savings from the remarkably high wages Ford paid. Partly to prevent unionization and partly to attract the best workforce in Michigan, Ford introduced a $5 a day wage in 1914. This was nearly double what most of his generous competitors paid, and it cut the legs out from under the union. Ford wasn't unionized. Yet even at these wages, Ford drove down the price to $345 in 1916. Okay, so here we have an insert. Do this. And this. Okay. I hope you can still see me, but if you can't, no big deal. So it's the last full paragraph here. If you have the book, which ends, drove down the price to $345 in 1916, here's what I want you to do. I want you to insert that. Oops, where did I go? There we go. I want you to insert at the end of that paragraph a new paragraph. And it goes like this. Price reductions of the Model T continued through $269 7 years later. But as economic historian Robert Gordon pointed out, even these stunning price declines only constituted the tip of the iceberg for real benefits. Hang on, why do I have the AI companion? Let's get rid of it. There we go. Real benefits of new products and their effects on ordinary lives. Modern day price indices do not make any provision for improvements in quality. And this is from a book by Robert Gordon called Rise and Fall of American Growth. Excellent book. I urge that you take a look at that. He says, quote, total factor productivity skyrocketed during the period 1920 to 1970, in the period 1920-1970 years compared to previous. His claim that this also applied to subsequent decades is dubious. His own recalibration of the price data for value implies that calculations of the productivity gains of the computer era, for example, are unsatisfactory and, in the opinion of these authors, me and Mike, exceptionally low. This will be dealt with in a later chapter. Ford nearly single-handedly ended public transportation in the United States. And this is one reason that liberals just hate cars, because cars have wiped out a lot of public transportation, which of course all socialists want because they can control you. Can't control you as well in a car. In 1900, there were only 8,000 motor cars on American roads, but by 1929, 2.8 million autos hurtled across the nation, a 28,000% increase. By the end of World War I, nearly a third of all transit companies were bankrupt. So many of them came out. And this is, of course, from my friend John Heitman, The Automobile in American Life. So the automobile's purpose was more complex than the design of the Tin Lizzie, however. Famous for saying history is bunk, the automaker, I'm sorry, let me start that again. The automaker's personal life was more complex than the design of the Tin Lizzie, however. Famous for saying history is bunk, Ford actually spent millions of dollars collecting and preserving historical artifacts. And he could be a master of the gaffe. While making a speech at Sing Sing prison in New York, Ford opened by saying, boys, I'm glad to see you here. But as an international utopian in the mold of Alfred Nobel, Ford put his money where his mouth was, financing a peace ship in 1915 to haul himself and other peace cranks to Germany to instruct Kaiser Wilhelm to call off the war. Like, that's going to happen. You think of little Greta Thunberg. His anti-Semitism was well known, and to his great discredit, he financed an anti-Jewish newspaper in Detroit, to which he frequently contributed. After Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany, Ford expressed admiration for Der Fuhrer, who supposedly had a picture of the American on his wall. At the same time, Henry Ford struggled with the automobile. Another fantastic machine appeared on the scene when two bicycle manufacturers from Dayton, Ohio, Wilbur and Orville Wright, sought to use the laws of aerodynamics to produce machine-powered, human-controlled flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Although the Wright brothers' maiden voyage on December 17, 1903 lasted just 12 seconds and covered only 120 feet, one person said you could have thrown a ball further. It displayed the possibility of conquering air itself to the world. The flight proved highly embarrassing to the U.S. government, which through the Army had given seed money to a similar program under the direction of Samuel P. Langley. But Langley's government-funded aircraft crashed ignominiously, and after the Wright brothers' success, he stood to lose his funding. He therefore claimed the Wright brothers' flight had not been powered flight at all, but gliding, which it was not. The Wrights contributed to the suspicion with their secrecy about the designs, fearing patent infringements of the type that afflicted Eli Whitney. Already, Glenn Curtiss and others had taken elements of the Wright Flyer and applied them to their own craft. Thus, the Wrights hesitated to publicly display the aircraft for several years to conduct highly visible trials. President Roosevelt intervened to settle the issue, insisting on a carefully monitored test in which Langley was proven wrong, and the Wrights, well, right. In a 1908 summer flight at Le Mans, France, Wilbur flew an airplane for an hour and a half, covering more than 40 miles. Le Figaro, France's premier newspaper, gushed that it had witnessed, quote, Wilbur Wright and his great white bird, the beautiful mechanical bird. There is no doubt Wilbur and Orville Wright have well and truly flown, unquote. Convinced, in 1909, the Army gave the Wright brothers a contract for $30,000 per machine, per airplane. The auto and airplane were still in their infancy, and only the most eccentric dreamers could envision an America crisscrossed by thousands of miles of asphalt and dotted with hundreds of airports. Dreamers of another sort remained hard at work, though, in the realm of social engineering. So this is a great place to stop here. We'll come back next time with our progressive reformers. Remember, any questions you want the new update, email me at larry@wildworldhistory.com. I will be making all the homeschool conventions next year. I thought about not doing it, but I will do it, including, I think, the Texas Homeschool Convention in Houston, the Arizona Home Educators Association, what's it called? Arizona Parent Educator, I don't know. Anyway, the Arizona Homeschool Convention and the Florida Parent Educators Association. There are so many of these names, and that one's in Orlando. I am doing all of these. Also, I have a brand new book out. Oops, it's on that shoulder. Brand new book out, America in the 21st Century, will be out in February. And I am doing a number of stops and a number of speeches wherever I am going to a homeschool convention, anywhere in that region. So if you or a homeschool group or a Republican political group want to have me in to speak, check the Great Homeschool Conventions plus the Arizona, Florida, and Texas convention dates. And if you want me in to speak, I'll do it at a discount. I mean, you got to cover my expenses. I have to get a little bit of something, something, as they would say, get a little something, something. But it's not going to break the bank. If you want to band together and have a bunch of homeschoolers, have me come in. I'm happy to do it. And remember, I'm always willing to do a Zoom meeting with several of you if you want to band together and have a Zoom on a particular topic. All right, I will see you guys next time.